There's a growing demand for world leaders, many around the world, to get humanitarian aid into Gaza, where food, water and fuel are now in critically short supply. Israel has said that emergency supplies must not end up in the hands of Hamas, which the UK has designated as a proscribed terrorist organisation. Earlier this morning, Rishi Sunak arrived here in Jerusalem for talks with Israeli leaders, condemning the attacks by Hamas and the horrific loss of life. He also pushed for urgently needed aid to be allowed into Gaza. Trucks carrying relief supplies could begin entering Gaza through the Rafah crossing in Egypt in the coming days. That's according to the White House. A couple of hours ago, Mr. Sunak arrived in Saudi Arabia. And in the past few minutes, the Saudi government have released these pictures of the Prime Minister meeting the kingdom's de facto leader, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, reports on Israel's relentless bombing of Gaza and plans for a ground offensive. And a warning, you may find some images in her report distressing.
If it's hard to watch, how much harder to endure this level of suffering? 11 people from one family were killed in a strike on Khan Yunis this morning. They, like hundreds of thousands of others, had obeyed Israel's instructions to move south from Gaza City. They thought they would be safe. The truth is, whatever the target, you can't carry out an air campaign as relentless as this in a crowded place like Gaza without killing civilians, whether you mean to or not. Overnight, an Israeli strike hit a house in Jabalia. Maybe an important Hamas leader was there. Maybe not. These children were. There are children everywhere in Gaza. Half the population is under 18. Israel is massing its forces on the perimeter of the Gaza Strip, ready for a ground offensive. But that will be fraught with peril for everyone, for Israeli soldiers, for Hamas, and for civilians. The Israeli Defense Forces have been practicing urban conflict in a mocked-up Gaza City, and they fought there before. But they'll be taking on an enemy on its home territory, which has had months to prepare.
They're going to be fighting against Hamas to their front, to their flanks, to the rear, above them, and beneath them with the sewers. And to expect this to be a relatively casualty-free operation for the Israelis would be naive. But also to expect this to be relatively casualty-free for the civilian population would be naive. There's absolutely no doubt about it that if the civilians stay in that area, there's going to be a catastrophic loss of life.
The Israeli Defense Force says Hamas has dug a labyrinth of tunnels under Gaza City, Wadi Gaza and Khan Yunis, some as deep as 70 meters. The IDF says it destroyed 60 kilometers of the network in 2021. But some 240 kilometers are believed to remain. Hamas's allies, Islamic Jihad, made this propaganda video about the tunnels. Hamas says they're keeping some of the more than 200 Israeli hostages down there, another complicating factor in any potential Israeli ground offensive. Families of the hostages held a press conference in Tel Aviv today, begging Hamas to release them, imagining what terror their children might be going through.
Terrified, terrified. I can hear every night my son screaming to me, "Mom, take me home, Mom." I can hear him. "Bring me home, Mom, save me." I'm asking you, save our child.
And so it goes on. Israeli children, Palestinian children, worse to come.
But the purpose of war is to achieve a better peace. And unless there is a parallel political process, unless something is done to address the root causes of this conflict, we could well find ourselves in 30 days or 60-day time questioning who won and actually what was the purpose of that.
So far, all this destruction and pain has enabled Israel to kill half a dozen Hamas leaders. They say their goal is to destroy Hamas completely. But at what price?
Lindsay Hilson reporting. And by the way, I apologise for my voice. It's sounding a little croaky. I hope you can still hear what I'm trying to say. Now, as Lindsay was saying, Israel states that their aim is to destroy Hamas, but who then would govern Gaza? Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Sikander Kamani has been speaking to Israeli ministers about this, and he joins me now from near the border with Gaza. Sikander.
Well, Matt, as well as meeting Rishi Sunak today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been meeting Israeli troops close to the border with Gaza, and he told them that Israel will win this war, whilst the defence minister told them that they will soon be inside Gaza. So all the rhetoric at the moment still very much pointing to this ground offensive, despite the apparent delays to it. What there's much less public discussion around is the future that Israel envisages for Gaza after this conflict. And I've been speaking, as you say, to the Israeli agriculture minister, who's also the former head of the Shin Bet intelligence agency. What's the plan after Hamas is defeated, if they are indeed defeated by you?
They will be defeated, as I told you, in both, in military equipment and in running the Gaza Strip as a institution.
So what comes up next?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think that Israel, we have to take care of the whole 100% of the Gaza Strip aspects. We need to take care of aspects that are influencing the life in Israel. And as I said, Gaza Strip as an area with 2.2 million people has to be a problem that has to be solved by the international community and not just by the state of Israel.
What do you mean, some kind of international mandate? Who governs it? The PA had no credibility.
During a war, I don't think that Israel has to elaborate and how the Gaza Strip has to be managed post the war.
But these are the mistakes the Americans made in Afghanistan and Iraq, aren't they? That's what President Biden was saying to you yesterday.
I think that to draw similarities from Afghanistan and Iraq to the Gaza Strip is totally a mistake.
Well, the minister also told me that Israel was planning on creating an expanded buffer zone in the Gaza Strip. But look, all of this very much depends on how the war goes. Even senior military commanders are saying that they expect it to be a long and difficult conflict. Interestingly, up until this attack, Hamas in Gaza had been facing a degree of growing internal dissent. Now, in the face of Israeli airstrikes, public opinion seems to be rallying behind them.
Sikander, thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm joined now from Ramallah by Nabal Farsak, who's the spokesperson for the Palestine Red Crescent Society. Nabal, thank you very much for coming on the programme. I want to talk about these dozens of aid trucks that are parked at the Egyptian border trying to get into Gaza, perhaps tomorrow. What's the latest? Are they going to be allowed in tomorrow, and what's on these trucks?
So according to the latest information, the Palestine Red Crescent Society teams are ready to start tomorrow receiving the aid in coordination with the Egyptian Red Crescent from the Rafah crossing border, and to begin the distribution process. There is no so much information regarding the types of aid that will be allowed to get in. As we have discussed, according to the most importantly, while all of aid is absolutely very needed and it's extremely important, but the most important is to allow the fuel to get in, and also the medical supplies. As you know, hospitals are having shortages of medicines, medical supplies as well. So those are the most important aid, besides water and food as a humanitarian aid for Palestinian civilians.
And if you don't get the medical supplies in, especially because you're from the Red Crescent, how critical would that be for the people of Gaza?
It is extremely critical because the health sector in Gaza is really collapsing, according to the Ministry of Health, how it states. The situation is so much alarming. We're talking about most of hospitals are running out of fuel, as well as extreme shortages of medical supplies and medicines. This comes with the overwhelming situation that all hospitals are witnessing now due to the increasing number of casualties.
There was one doctor in Gaza, a British Palestinian doctor who we spoke to last week. He posted on Twitter today a bottle of vinegar that he'd bought in a shop and was using that as a kind of disinfectant.
No wonder, actually, because as we just have said, and we have been calling for the international community since days, for days and weeks, to pressure Israel to open a humanitarian corridor to allow the entry of medical supplies and medicines along with the fuel. This is extremely important, so all hospitals can continue providing their medical services. If the aid will not get in, that means it's absolutely a humanitarian catastrophe.
Do you think that, severe casualties in the Gaza Strip that cannot be cared for, that even if the aid comes in, won't be cared for properly, should be evacuated to a safe location outside Gaza?
Absolutely. That's what we have been calling for. It's an opening for a humanitarian corridor, not only a one-time opening. Due to the continuous escalation, we have been under this escalation for the 12th day. So we are in urgent need for an opening of a humanitarian corridor to allow the entry of medical supplies and the humanitarian aid. We are extremely worried if it's just a one-time tomorrow and with just very limited trucks that will be allowed to be in. They might be not even enough to fill the gaps in the that's all hospitals are facing. Besides all of that, most importantly, there is hundreds and even maybe thousands of injuries who need to be evacuated outside of Gaza Strip to get the treatments, because there is some confiscated surgeries that can't be done at Gaza, especially at those moments. There's before even the escalation, patients with chronic diseases who have already scheduled appointments to go outside of Gaza to do some kind of surgeries. Now they are stuck in Gaza and they can't go to get the treatment that they are desperately in need for it.
Okay, Nebal Fasak, thank you very much indeed there. Well, the UN chief, Antonio Guterres, has warned that the entire Middle East is in a moment of profound crisis, as he called for an immediate ceasefire and for Hamas to release the hostages. Along with Rishi Sunak, Britain's Foreign Secretary James Cleverly is also meeting leaders in Qatar, Egypt and Turkey, while Germany's foreign minister is also on her way to the Middle East. But it is this flurry of diplomacy which is definitely taking place having any impact on the ground. A roll call of visits. On Tuesday, the German Chancellor. His entourage got a taste of war at Tel Aviv airport thanks to a rocket raid from Gaza. On Wednesday, the American president. No hiccups, but plenty of diplomatic heft. And today, it was Britain's turn. Some talk about respecting the lives of all civilians, but primarily, this was a show of solidarity garnished with history.
80 years ago, Prime Minister, the civilized world stood with you in your darkest hour. This is our darkest hour. It's the world's darkest hour. We need to stand together, and we want to win. And this is why I value your support and the fact that you're here. We must win together. That means that this is a long war and we'll need your continual support.
You describe this as Israel's darkest hour. Well, then it's for me to say I'm proud to stand here with you in Israel's darkest hour. As your friend, we will stand with you in solidarity, we will stand with your people, and we also want you to win.
Thank you.
Whatever winning means. Earlier, Mr. Sunak arrived at the King David Hotel, once blown up by a Zionist underground organization when the British still ruled over Palestine. History uses the revolving door here, but the Prime Minister was in too much of a hurry to appreciate the signature left here by a former regular guest and a predecessor from a darkest hour. Good morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning. I'm very pleased to be able to be here. It's an important time. It's important for me to be able to express my solidarity with the Israeli people following what was a horrific terrorist attack. Productive meetings ahead of us today. I'm looking forward to seeing the Prime Minister and President. There's lots of work for us to do.
Will you be urging restraint on the Israeli government regarding the civilians in Gaza? Prime Minister, like President Biden.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, here we go again. The British public is horrified by events here in Israel, but also very concerned about the fate of innocent Palestinian civilians in Gaza. What are you doing to urge the Israeli government for restraint?
Well, the first thing to say is I'm pleased to be here at this important time to express my solidarity with the Israeli people after they've suffered an absolutely horrific act of terrorism which has impacted so many, and I'm pleased to be able to be here to express both my and the United Kingdom's steadfast support for Israel at this difficult time. I've just arrived. I'm actually now on my way to meet British families, which I'm sure you'll appreciate is important, and then I have my meetings with the Prime Minister and the President. I'll be raising a range of issues with them.
Including restraint.
I'll be raising a range of issues with them, and after that I very much look forward to talking to the media. Thank you very much.
Guys, thank you guys.
Mr. Sunak then huddled with some of the families of the 16 British victims and hostages.
I don't know what we hope.
Afterwards, we spoke to Sharon and Riaz, uncles to 13-year-old Yahel on the left, who is now dead, and 16-year-old Noya on the right, who is missing, presumed a hostage in Gaza.
First of all, I would like to thank the Prime Minister, Mr. Sunak, that he came visit in Israel and standing with us. And I'm very appreciate his efforts to bring our family back home.
When we met Prime Minister Sunak today, we felt like he was with us in his heart. This is what we feel, and we want to thank him. And if I could use this moment to talk with Noya. Noya, if you're somewhere and you're hearing this, maybe now, maybe in the future, know that we are doing everything to bring you back home, and your father and your uncle. And we love you. We love you, Noya.
How has this appalling tragedy changed you, and how will it change your country?
Yeah. Our life will not be the same, of course. Again, I think what we see now is like a black day of our life and also of our nation. And we will find a way to overcome. Personally, I know that our family will make some changes, of course. We will not be the same. But we are strong enough, and we have our duty for the little ones in our family, and we will bring joy to their life, I'm sure.
You don't need to add anything to that, of course.
It's okay, it's okay.
Thank you very much to both of you. I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So. Thank you. Yeah. Now in Washington is David Miller. Excuse me. He's an American Middle East analyst, author and negotiator, and a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Thank you very much for coming on the program, Aaron David Miller. The president is going to address the nation, your nation, tonight, I think at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. What will he say, and what should he say, do you think, to the American people?
He's going to talk about the need for U.S. leadership, not just based on the importance of defending democracies, however imperfect they may be, in Israel and in Ukraine. He's going to talk about, I suspect he wants to link that to a definition of American national security. So he covers on one end the values proposition, and on the other end the material sort of strategic interests. I would argue to you, though, having immersed myself in the last 10 days on the Israeli-Palestinian piece of what he's going to talk about, I would still think that the Ukraine piece, with respect to American national security, is probably more central. I say that in full knowledge of the fact that an escalation of this conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in the north, and even the prospect of Iranian involvement, would turn this into a regional confrontation, which might in fact compete with the importance that the administration has attached to trying to figure out how to defeat Vladimir Putin's ongoing, what appears to be forever war against Ukraine. So I think he'll talk about that. But, you know, Americans, when it comes to foreign policy, Americans want as little of it as possible, unless it has a direct impact on their security and prosperity.
Okay. All right. So this issue is very unwelcome in American households, I guess, as it is in households around the world, because it seems so intractable. Is it possible, do you think, after the talks here yesterday, that the Israelis might do something other than a land invasion, that maybe they discussed with the president some kind of buffer zone or something?
Well, there's no maybes that the president, I think, tried without basically telling the prime minister and his war cabinet that they should not mount a massive ground campaign in Gaza right now. I think the president probably probed more along the lines of what do the Israelis hope to achieve? Do they have the means at their disposal to achieve it? What about the day after? What about the complications? Adherence to the international humanitarian law, the so-called rules of war. All of that was part of the discussion. And I suspect, we don't know this, but I suspect that the Israelis may well be considering alternatives. It's just right now, it's impossible to identify what they might be. Remember, next week we'll begin week 3 of this campaign. Still no ground campaign. Weather's a factor. The president's visit was a factor. Israeli indecision is a factor. The hostages are a factor. And the humanitarian dimension of this is also a factor.
Right. I hope it's one, not the other one that you just mentioned in your answer. The other question is this. What I've been hearing from my contacts in the IDF is that some of them are reluctant to go into Gaza because the government here has not given them a clear idea of what the final picture looks like. What does the day after look like? They don't know, and therefore they're kind of reluctant to go in and potentially sacrifice thousands of their lives.
Man, I think you sort of broke the code. I mean, military power is an instrument, right? It's a means to an end. I mean, the president in his public remarks yesterday cautioned. He said, he admitted, I think he emphasized, frankly, the severity of the mistakes that the U.S. made in the wake of 9/11, the 2 longest wars in American history, where the standard for victory was never could we win, but when could we leave? And the Israelis face a much more proximate problem because they have a proximity problem with Hamas and with the broader issue of the Palestinians. So this is not Israel's 9/11. This is something, frankly, with respect to Israeli security and the future of the state. This, in many respects, is much worse. Well, 15 9/11s in terms of death toll, as the president acknowledged, but much more central, frankly, to American security than the prosecution of wars in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Right. And just finally, and sadly briefly, if you kind of zoom out, right, you're looking at the geopolitical landscape, which isn't pretty at the moment. You've got Russia and Ukraine. You've got China flexing its muscles, which America's obsessed with. And now you've got this thing in the Middle East. Are all these different tectonic plates somehow connected, and how dangerous are they?
Well, they're dangerous. The connection points concern me in terms of formulating a U.S. strategy. I mean, each of these conflicts have idiosyncratic sorts of headlines and trend lines that are unique to them. Yeah, Iran supports Putin, right? So does that mean that defeating Iran would be a defeat for Putin? Well, probably, but by extension, does that mean we should turn this into a sort of a international conspiracy and pursue a major conflict against Iran in order to make the Ukraine situation more tractable? I mean, I think connecting the dots, Matt, sometimes leads to grand strategy, which frankly isn't so grand.
Okay. We'll leave those dots unconnected for now then. Aaron David Miller, thank you very much indeed. That's it from me in Jerusalem for today. From me and my voice, we'll be back tomorrow, hopefully sounding less croaky. Let's go to Kathy in London. Kathy, over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Joining me now is Sir Mark Lyle-Grant, a former senior British diplomat who was previously the UK's national security advisor and this country's top diplomat at the United Nations. Sir Mark, let's talk first about this diplomatic dance that we're witnessing. Can any of Netanyahu's international visitors, including the UK Prime Minister, change the course of events?
Well, I think there is a lot of diplomacy to do in terms of, in the short term, humanitarian, because the deal that President Biden struck was a very limited deal for maybe 20 trucks tomorrow to go through. There was no agreement on allowing foreign nationals out of Gaza. There was no agreement on more trucks going in. So I think that will be one area of diplomacy in the immediate future. Then in Saudi Arabia, it's a question of urging them not to react too aggressively to the military offensive that Israel is about to launch. And then with Netanyahu, he will have been, of course, encouraging Netanyahu to prosecute this conflict in a way that respects international humanitarian law. Now, those are all diplomatic messages, but they are not designed to bring this conflict to an early close.
Right, and well, then let's look at the next phase of this conflict, the ground invasion. Israel says its aim is to eliminate Hamas, but how possible is that? And if it's not possible, what happens next? And what is the point of that invasion?
Well, I think having stated the objective of destroying Hamas's military capability for all time and destroying Hamas as a political organization by taking out all its leadership, Israel has set itself a very high bar. And whether it can achieve that by military means is not clear. But what is clear is it can't achieve that without a ground incursion. And that's why I think the next phase will be that. But even if they do succeed in that objective, what happens the day after? Because Palestine issue will still be there. And actually what's happened over the last 15 years is that the Israeli government has tried to manage the Palestinian question by purely security means, through the Iron Dome, through aggressive policing of the West Bank, through bottling up Gaza. And that seemed to be quite successful for a while. And there was relative security in Israel, and there was a start of a normalization of relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors. But I'm afraid 7th of October, atrocities showed that it wasn't sustainable and it wasn't a successful policy.
So what next then? What's your answer to that question? I mean, is that when the diplomacy comes to the fore again, or is that really pretty hopeless at the moment?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not for today, but it is for the coming days. And I'm sure there's a lot of private discussion in Western capitals, particularly about this day after. And at that point, there has to be a political parallel track to the military track.
Well, how big a risk, though, in the meantime, as the ground invasion, takes effect, how big a risk is there of Hezbollah or Iran getting directly involved? And what are the implications of that globally?
I think the risks of Hezbollah getting directly involved and there being much greater unrest in the West Bank is quite significant. I think it's less likely that Iran will get directly involved. I mean, the reason that the Americans have projected force into the Eastern Mediterranean, and the British too to a lesser extent, is to deter Iran from getting directly involved. I don't think Iran wants to get involved, and so unless something really catastrophic happens, I don't see this spreading beyond Hezbollah and Hamas.
Right. But nevertheless, if you've got Hezbollah involved, that's a pretty powerful force, very destabilising in the Middle East as a whole. You've got Russia and Ukraine conflict still going on. You've got the possibility at some point in the future of China taking advantage, trying something on with Taiwan. That sounds very much like a kind of World War III scenario.
Well, there are three very separate conflicts. I mean, there's no doubt that Putin is one of the winners from the Middle East conflict at the moment, because attention is switched away from Ukraine to the Middle East. But nonetheless, that conflict, I think, is separate. I think China has actually learnt lessons from Ukraine and is probably less likely to take military action on Taiwan than perhaps was the case a couple of years ago. So it doesn't necessarily mean the start of World War III.
Well, that's some optimism at least. So Mark Lyle-Grant, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.